Me and my neighbor M walked to the store and didn't get back to our apartment complex until it was completely dark outside. It was pretty chilly out as it was early December, around 9:30 or 10 p.m. In order to get to the apartments, we had to walk through a stretch of road with no streetlights and covered by trees. Usually, you can use the moonlight that shines through the spaces in the leaves to see. Since it was December, it was cloudy, so not a whole lot of moonlight. There's a small entrance of trails that leads up to the cemetery behind the apartments. We smelled something like a decaying animal. We both assumed it was a deer that died, and that's extremely common around the apartments. However, M decided to point the flashlight at the entrance of the trails. We both saw a tall figure crouched down. I'm 5'9", and it would have been eye level to me. It was really skinny. A pale gray, long limbs, and either really sunken in eyes or none at all. All I saw was two black sockets. The way I describe it is it looked like someone took decaying skin and stretched it across a skeleton. We both ran until we got to M's apartment. We still don't know what we saw that night. We tried to figure out, but never got any answers. It's common for creepy stuff to happen at the apartments, as again, there is a cemetery right behind the buildings just through the woods. When I was younger and more ambitious in my early teens, I loved to explore the mountains of my home village and the gates of the Arctic National Park. I knew about how dangerous the caves could be in the mountains and never liked to go near them, but I loved waterfalls, big or small, that fell from great heights in the summer. One year, I had just received a Honda Foreman 500 as a gift from my mom. I rarely received physical items, as I am not much of a materialistic person, but I do enjoy getting vehicles that I can use for hunting as presents every now and then. Usually, they're older models, so they aren't as expensive as the newer ones, but I love them just as much, and I take care of them as best as I can. Anyway, I was driving my new Honda through an old trail that I only knew of as a snow machine, or snowmobile trail in the winter. I had recently learned about the summer trail, and I decided I would go and explore the valley it led into. While driving, I began to have the eerie feeling of being watched. The hair on my body stood on end on the side I felt like I was being watched from, so I knew where to glance at as I drove. I did my best to keep on the old rocky trail, and I began to glance over my left as frequently as possible. I think that, as a hunter, I've developed a better sense of when I'm being watched, and it seems to pay off quite a bit in the wilderness up here. As I looked over, I would scan the willow thickets. As I did, I noticed a dark figure keeping up with me. It stood tall, what I presumed to be about 8.5 feet tall, and it was keeping up with me as I was going about 25 miles per hour on a fairly smooth but rocky trail. I kicked the Honda into a higher gear and sped up. I only stopped feeling like it was just right there after I left the willow thickets. When I was able to, I looked back and watched the willows again. Keep in mind, these are diamond willows that stand about 10 feet tall, and I started to see the figure again. It was nearly as tall as the willows, and it brushed through them with ease, as if it was phasing through them or something. I haven't returned to that trail in quite some time, but I would like to return with my cousins to see if we can get some videos and pictures of whatever it was. Growing up in Tennessee on a small farm bordering a forest, I encountered numerous inexplicable events. but one series of occurrences remain a mystery to this day. Around the age of 12 or 13, I started having reoccurring dreams set in the forest, a place I frequently visited. In these dreams, I encountered a large black wolf with glowing red eyes. Strangely, each sighting of this wolf preceded a death on the farm within a day or two, typically involving a chicken falling prey to a predator. During my final dream involving the wolf, a woman's voice accompanied its presence in the forest. I could hear her. She always remained just out of my line of sight, though her words are now hazy in my memory. I recall her saying, "Do not fear the wolf," among other things. As the wolf circled me, I didn't feel fear, but rather a deep sense of respect for its ancient power. After that last encounter, I never saw the wolf again, but the dreams felt more vivid than reality. Since then, I've wondered about the identity of the wolf and the woman in the forest. These dreams mark the beginning of my fascination with the paranormal, leading to many more inexplicable experiences. I've often wondered if I connected with a forest spirit or a Native American presence during those encounters. So, I've been hearing this creepy bird-like whistle since 18 and whatnot. For context, we live at the countryside and there is a sugarcane field at the back of our house, and behind the field was the woods. The field was wide, so it was a bit far from our house. I don't know when exactly I started hearing it, but as I remember, I've started to hear it at the age of 18. I'm 20 now, so it's been 2 years. At first I pay it no mind, but I noticed that I've been hearing it near my apartment I'm staying at for college. I've moved apartments, so it was my second apartment, and it was also near the woods. It was located at the end of the street, and one time, I went out alone to buy some snacks because I was pulling an all-nighter for my project, and that's when I heard the weird whistle again. I don't want to overthink too much, and I told myself before that it might just be a bird, but when I heard it that night, it creeped me out. I think I heard it last February this year, and I'm still hearing it every time I go home to the countryside. Should I be concerned, or am I just being paranoid? A few years ago in college, I worked the opening shift at a coffee shop. In the summertime, I would get up early as the sun rose and stop by a trail sometimes on my way to work to wake myself up with a quick walk. The trail was only accessible off of a narrow, long winding dirt road, and this dirt road was off of a main road with no houses. The trail was poorly marked, so not many people would ever stop by, and if there was anyone else, you would either see their car parked in the small 3-car gravel lot at the trailhead, or would have to pass them on the narrow dirt road. You would have to walk a long ways down a main highway road to get there otherwise. So, back to the shave and a haircut bit. I parked there one morning, just kind of sitting in my car with the window down, when I heard a bird singing what sounded like the 2 bits, part of the song. Tired and trying to find humor in having to be up so early, I kinda laughed and whistled the shave and a haircut part, and waiting for the bird to whistle back. We went back and forth with our little game a few more times until the bird stopped responding, so I figured it flew off. Before I got out of my car though, I gave it one last whistle, and I'm glad I did, because as soon as I whistled shave and a haircut and waited for a response, I heard 2 very loud and very human claps in the 2 bits rhythm. not far from where I was parked. Drove the fuck out of there and there was no one on the road for miles. Not the most terrifying story on here, but weirds me out to think someone might have just been out there in the woods watching me alone in my car. I had some more weird shit happen last night. I took my 2 dogs for walks. I normally walk Finn towards the park where I have had these experiences, and I walk Booger in the other direction toward downtown. On my walk with Finn, about a block away in the direction I was headed, I saw 3 or 4 deer calmly walking toward the park. Most nights where found something weird happens to me start like this. The deer seemed completely unbothered by me as I approached. They kept walking toward the park, but stopped every few steps to look back at me, as if they wanted me to follow them. Then, as Finn and I reached where the deer were, I noticed about 10 or more other deer waiting as well. They all start walking together, calm, but still looking back at me every few feet. On my way toward the park, I smelled the stench of rotting meat. I know this smell very well as I used to be a butcher. It was strong, like someone plugged my nostrils with rotting ground meat or something. At the same time I smell this stench, I get the chills. Finn's hair stands up, and he gets more nervous. I can feel the air around me get colder. As we continue walking, I look down an alleyway that cuts the block in half, and if you would walk down the dark alley, would spot you out of nowhere. I eventually walk back home. I was 2 blocks away from the park. When you reach the park, you can either turn around and walk down the same road. You can continue into the park, or you can continue on the road which turns left. Looking down that alleyway, you are looking at the part of the road that continues left, which is the way I take every night on my way back home. What I saw, I tried to convince myself wasn't real. Or maybe I just saw something else and my brain tried to convince me it was this. A large, muscular, pale, hairless creature that was moving fast. So fast I could barely see it. I saw the motion down the alley about 2 blocks away. The exit of the alley on that side was a street light directly above it. It wasn't standing still. It was moving and it was moving fast. The only reason I'm positive what I saw wasn't a deer or something normal is because of something I saw later that night that I will write about when I talk about it with my walk with Booger. It solidified that what I saw was something I wasn't supposed to see. In the meantime, I convinced myself I was making stuff up and being a pussy. As we approached the tree line of the park, the large group of deer moved to the side of the street where the neighborhood is. While I'm on the side with the tree line, I noticed something in the clearing. A lone deer, separate from the large group across the street, staring directly at me. I have my flashlight pointed at him, and I even hung up my call with my wife to use my phone to take a video of this moment. This lone deer doesn't even have micro movements from breathing. The other deer across the street were constantly readjusting. You might be thinking to yourself, oh yeah, deer do that with bright lights shining at them. Deer in headlights always act like that. Just wait. Finn gets to pull up very hard and acts anxious, nearly knocking me over. I turn to look across the street towards the large group of deer for at most 3 seconds, before quickly turning around to face the lone deer again. In those 3 seconds, that lone deer is easily 30 feet closer to me, still not moving, staring directly at me. I have this on video. I have pictures. I felt weird. I felt unsafe. I've lived in rural Iowa my whole life, and I am and have always lived outdoors. This didn't feel normal. I was scared. I back away while shining my light at the deer. Once I get a block or so away, He finally turns around and calmly walks into the tree line. The whole way home, I feel like I'm being stalked. Not just watched, but like something is following me intentionally. Now I went home and sat for a bit and tried to talk myself into believing it was all a coincidence. After nearly 20 minutes, I started to walk Booger, my smaller chi mix. The entire walk was nice and very enjoyable, actually. I had my earbuds in and was talking to my wife about what I saw in a joking way. Man, I'm such a pussy. I really scared myself for no reason, I said. At the end of the walk, I turned to go down our alleyway. As I leave from the garage on our walks, I stopped speaking from what I saw on the opposite end of the alley. My wife heard me stop. I want to preface this with I did not have any substances, including alcohol, for weeks up to that point. The most I ever do in that department is a few beers, or I'll use some weed to ease anxiety if life is getting hard. I have no mental conditions that would cause me to hallucinate. The most I have is a personality disorder resulting from trauma that I've been overcoming quickly this last year. I saw two large, muscular, pale, hairless creatures walking like apes at the end of the alley. The same thing I thought I saw with Finn, this time not going fast, much closer, and it felt intentional. I saw them walk across the street very slowly, staring directly at me. These were not deer. They didn't have long faces like deer. They didn't have fur or tails. They didn't walk like deer. They weren't slender like a deer. My first thought was honestly that I was looking at two hairless male lions in the middle of Iowa. I stood there, paralyzed with fear. Well, after they had left my sight, 15 seconds later, I finally get the courage to walk the few feet into the garage. When I take my first step, I see a third one, slowly meandering across the street, staring at me. Booger noticed him too and started growling. I ran to the door and watched the garage door shut all the way. The entire night, Finn guarded the bedroom door. He never does that. He sat staring at the door all night. Booger stared at the windows all night. He never does that either. This happened to me yesterday night, Monday, May 13th of 2024. I don't know what to think. Back when I was 12, I had really bad sleep paralysis. Almost every night without fail, I would go to sleep just to wake up a few hours later, completely unable to move. My bed was facing the doorway at the time. Every time I had sleep paralysis, a tall, dark figure with a top hat and a pocket watch would stand at my doorframe and watch me. I knew he had a pocket watch because it dangled from his pants and I could always hear the tick of the seconds going by. This entity gave me really bad vibes, so this alone freaked me out. I talked with my therapist at the time and my PCP, and I was prescribed sleeping medication, and my sleep paralysis soon stopped. When I was 15, I started dating this really toxic guy. I was in a relationship with him for a dreadful 2 years. At some point, I think about a year and some odd months in, me and him are sitting in my room playing Minecraft. About 30 minutes into playing, he looks into the hallway outside of my room and just instantly starts bawling. I had never seen this guy cry before. After about 15 minutes of him crying and freaking out, I got him to finally speak to me. He explained to me that a tall, dark figure with a top hat and pocket watch told him that he needed to leave me alone or he'd off his entire family. I never once told him about my sleep paralysis, let alone told him about the entity that would visit me during it. So, yeah, that creeped me out a lot. I ended up telling some of my friends about it, and they all were pretty weirded out by it too. But whatever, right? Crazy coincidence. Whenever I would bring up the entity, I called him James. No clue why, but that's just the name I felt belonged to him. However, there has always been strange things happening at our house. A random, weird smell, things moving, my door shutting, knocking, you name it. A few days ago, I decided to tell my grandfather, who I live with, about my experiences with this entity while one of my friends were over at the house. My grandfather got this confused look on his face and said, a pocket watch? His name is James? I told him yes, and he said nothing else. Then went downstairs. Me and my friend looked at each other and we were like, okay. Then about 10 minutes later, he came back upstairs with a box. He opened the box and proceeded to pull out a pocket watch with the name James W. Cunningham engraved on the back of it. My jaw dropped and I was speechless. He proceeded to tell me that the pocket watch belonged to his grandfather and gave it to him before he passed. I still can't wrap my head around this fully. What are your guys' thoughts? Should I try to contact him after all these years? I've had 2 experiences in my lifetime so far. Currently in my 30s. Most recent was about 2 years ago. I lived alone in 1-bedroom apartment in California. A couple weeks leading up to the event, I kept having a feeling I was being watched as I laid in bed before falling asleep. Then one night, I woke up just past 3 a.m. and I had a feeling I was being watched again. I lifted my head off the pillow and looked towards my door, and immediately I felt a hand smack the side of my head and pushed it back into the pillow. Completely freaked me out. I jumped out of bed and turned on every light, ran around my whole apartment and found nothing. I was alone. However, my first experiences happened when I was around 12 years old. My family and I, mom, dad, and sister, had just moved into a new house in Colorado. The weird stuff started happening on the first night in the new house. I had a bunk bed at the time. Top bunk was the bed and the bottom was a desk. On the first night, shortly after I got into bed, I felt the whole bed starting to shake. It felt as if someone was grabbing one of my bedposts and was violently shaking the bed with their hands. It lasted about 5 or so minutes. This happened every single night that I slept in that bed in that house. I tried explaining to my parents what had happened, but they brushed it off like I was crazy. Never believed me. A few months after moving into the house, my alarm clock would start going off at random times in the middle of the night, and always at a different time. My dad was getting furious at me waking him up, but at that point in my life, I never used my alarm feature on that clock. Not one time had I ever physically turned on the alarm. As much as I pleaded with my parents, they never believed me. I should also add that my sister had an identical bed in her own separate room and never experienced her bed shaking or anything else weird. We only lived in that house for about 1.5 years, and immediately after, moving, all of those experiences stopped. That bed never shook again. Alarm never went off again. Years later, my dad would admit that he experienced some weird things in the house as well. Never brought it up for fear of embarrassment. On one particular night, he heard a loud noise in the hallway in front of my room. Being a work night, he was pretty upset, thinking I was messing around late at night and had woke him. He got up out of bed and peeked his head out the door. He swears he saw a shadowy figure standing in front of my door. Completely freaked him out and he immediately jumped back into bed. Made me question him why he never believed me when I was telling him all the stuff going on in my room at the time. I think he just refused to believe anything like that could ever be real or possible. Those are my experiences with the weird or paranormal. I have only told a couple people outside of my family, unsure of how people would react or treat me. I figured this could be a safe place to finally express what I've dealt with. She told me this story a long time ago, and so did my aunt to confirm it. She went to an all-girls school back then, but the weird part, first of all, was the school was built in the middle of a graveyard. Well, they claimed to have moved the dead bodies, but I don't think so. It was a boarding school, and my mom said every night they would hear voices of people talking, horses running, children laughing and playing. By the way, they lived far from town, so they weren't other buildings or kids or horses close by. My mom said it was so terrifying for them that no one could leave their rooms and girls would end up wetting the bed out of fear of going outside. But no one judged them because they could understand. My mom said one time she dared to step out and saw all of the tapes running and voices of people chatting. She ignored it and went to shower and said she felt something hit her so hard she didn't even know how she ended up in the back of her room. My aunt said one time she tried to run away from home just because she didn't want to go to school. She didn't even know how my mom was calm during that time because she would always freak out each time she heard school had resumed and would cry and her parents would have to drag her into the car. And she is older than my mom, but you would think she was the younger sister. When they tried to tell their parents, no one took it seriously, and they said they were probably just scared for nothing or just looking for an excuse not to go to school. She said they had to go through all this for years, and she said the worst of it was when a few students, not at the same time, got possessed, and they had to struggle between staying indoors with someone that they could or would harm them, or go outside and be around weird noises and sounds. She said only the dorm master, or matron, knew what they were going through, but even she did nothing. But I'm guessing maybe the school told her to pretend she didn't know. I mean, if they admit the school is haunted, all parents would pull their kids out and they would lose a lot of money. Not sure when the school closed down, but it's no longer being used. Maybe things got out of hand and eventually they couldn't stop pretending it wasn't haunted. Who knows? The house that I lived in has a big window in the kitchen, and it gives you a pretty good view of most of our backyard. Well, a few months after we moved in, I started seeing and hearing something lurking behind the trees that lined the yard. I didn't think anything of it. I'm pretty used to seeing weird stuff happening. About a year ago, I would start hearing light tapping and knocks on my door and door window to my bedroom. This went on almost every night for about 5 or 10 minutes, then silence for another few months. Then a week ago, I would see the shadow of someone standing in my kitchen, and it would disappear after you looked at it. I wouldn't have just been fine if I didn't hear the metal chair get shoved across my room in the middle of the night. Now its shadow appears in my room, and the knocking on my door is back. I really want to get a reaction out of it so I could get some more proof, but I'm unsure of how to piss off a spirit. Any tips? I am a shaky believer. I have had strange things happen, but I'm usually able to debunk or rationalize things. 2 things have happened before this incident I haven't been able to explain. I honestly need and am looking for advice or similar experiences. This just happened. I'm a 22-year-old girl. I was laying in bed on my phone waiting for my partner, who is 24, to join me in my bed after leaving the restroom. For context, Our bed is pushed into the corner of our room. We do have a cat, but she was laying near my head. I was lying on my side, back to the wall, facing the rest of the room with my phone in my face. Room light was off, but plenty of street lamps shine in and light the room. We don't have curtains, only blinds, and we sleep with the windows cracked open. I didn't hear my boyfriend leave the restroom, but I thought he walked up to the side of the bed. I saw a shadowy figure in the dark that was about his height and build, standing in a weird way, arms kind of out to its sides, elbows next to the bed. I thought it was just my boyfriend goofing around and trying to scare me. He likes to do that. I turned my bright phone around to try and annoy him, but there was literally no one standing there. I thought I just imagined it since I was expecting him, but I turned on my phone light to light up the room better while I continued to watch videos on my phone. This way I wouldn't be surprised or spooked by him in the first place. My boyfriend was still in the bathroom. I felt a touch on my leg. I jerked my leg up and shined my light towards the end of the bed, and trying to be rational, I went back to my phone to brush it off. No cats though, just me and my blanket. Before I could even feel better about it, I felt a second, longer touch that physically scrunched up the blanket against my leg. That was enough for me. I shot up, and despite how scared I was, I hurried out of the bed to turn the light on. I knocked on the bathroom door and told my boyfriend to hurry, because at this point I was having a hard time being by myself. I barely believe in ghosts, mind you, but in that moment something invisible touched me. Trying to rationalize, I went back into our room to sit with our cat. As soon as I sat down, I heard a woman outside, in the distance but still unnervingly close, start screaming. I froze. It was hard to decipher what she was trying to say, but I caught two things: help me and he's after me. No one was outside, and even if they were screaming, stopped as soon as it started. I pulled up my phone to call 911, and that was when my boyfriend left the bathroom and saw me shaking like a leaf. I have a cross-country road trip coming up next month. I'm anxious but excited for it. That is the only major change recently in my life. I saw a shadowy figure, then two touches on my leg, one moving my blanket. Heard a woman screaming outside near immediately after. No woman outside. Was this a warning? Has someone gone through this? I don't think I'm mostly skeptic anymore and would like advice. I have a major trip coming up. I doubt it's related, but could it be? Hello. I'm writing this because I never got any sort of debrief or moment to decompress from a job I quit in February of 2018. I worked for an agency that dealt with issues related to non-human intelligence. Sometimes these were referred to as EBEs, or as a friend lovingly called them AYYYSs. I can't divulge what I did specifically. Most of the information I'm going to discuss is anecdotal information I found out about from colleagues. This is because it would be easy to identify me from what my role was. As the information I can say about what I did specifically, it would be personally identifying. Feel free to dismiss my post as a hoax entirely. I know the right people will believe me. I'm posting this for myself, to make peace with the gravity, no pun intended, of the situation. I tried VA and independent therapy, but divulging this sort of information to a hipster trained in active listening probably wouldn't go well. Posting here is a last resort, but I hope I'm welcome to discuss what I can. I'll first talk about my career history, what working for the agency is like, how it functions, and then my general thoughts. If my post makes it past moderation, I'll answer as many questions as I can. I'm unwilling to post an ID privately to moderators or otherwise. People who did that faced consequences. I don't think those people were Reddit leakers specifically, but any act to talk about the information in any meaningful way outside of the chain of command ends badly. I'd rather be accused of making things up than risk that, because I simply don't care what people think of me. Hopefully, my post will clear up why. I'm currently a university professor, not at the university my username would lead you to believe. I was inspired to write this post when one of my students referred to me as verbatim, a dude who has to know about aliens. If only he knew that wasn't even the start of it. I graduated from college in the early 90s with a degree in something I'm passionate about, but never used. I started my career as an assistant for a mechanical engineer at an aerospace contractor. I got, after working some connections I had, entry-level contractor jobs are easy to get than you may think. Well, maybe not if you've posted here. I eventually was a project manager overseeing a small team working on experimental aircraft. Over the course of my career in aviation, I worked at 3 different contractors. I was on some of the teams working in anonymous flight in Nevada, among other places. I'll share 2 major things I noticed that, looking back, could be related to NHI research. It was a sort of open secret I was let in on at some point in the late 90s, that if a large-scale invasion or threat to the mainland US were to materialize, the US had an ultimate trump card, of sorts that would render everything we were working on as completely obsolete. Jokes like, well, work smarter, not harder on X, because if it were to come down to it, we wouldn't use that technology anyway, weren't uncommon. I assumed this was referring to nukes. Later, I spent time doing inspections at various secret facilities due to my standing in particular agencies. If I'm identified, I will definitely lose that standing. So there's that. This was not as exciting as it sounds. It was very technical and boring. I was mostly just a glorified HVAC inspector. I visited a handful of facilities, but 2 of them in particular stood out as there were areas within them I wasn't allowed to access. At the first facility, the scope of my job was to inspect the entire location. One area had its own security, who, after a long discussion, basically told me to kick rocks. My boss wasn't authorized to let me through either. I wrote a scathing report about this incident in my overall assessment of the facility, and my boss erased it from the document entirely. The situation at the second facility was similar. I'll admit, I was what I guess the students call a Karen about it. I knew that whoever was operating these areas was working completely outside of congressional regulation, which, while it does happen in certain sectors, is really not a good look. Once I got the job I'm talking about, I was able to confirm the second facility was related to NHI research. I was never able to confirm the first was. After a teaching stint, I was offered an interview for a position in my project management roots again, near where I was living at the time. I wasn't told what I would be working on, which isn't uncommon. I was excited to get back to work because I had been working on goal-oriented drone swarms in my free time and assumed that's what the interview would be for. The interview took place in a SCIF in someone's house. Looking back, this was most likely a house that wasn't lived in but just used for the purpose of interviewing potential hires without giving away the location. It's also likely this was the location because this agency doesn't exist in any official capacity. Yes, it has a name. It gets sort of kind of funding. Saying the name would get me killed. I wish I were exaggerating. I was told the name at the start of the interview, and I had never heard of it before. I've never even said the name out loud. Paradoxically, even though the agency doesn't exist, if someone knew the name, it's likely a paper trail exists through publicly available documents. A lot of the information isn't classified because the agency is so secretive. Going through the process to classify it in the first place would reveal it to too many people. In past interviews, particularly for the inspection job, I could refer to specific colleagues, facilities I worked at, or contractors I was in good standing with to play the usual interview game. In this interview, I was treated like a brand new hire. While I was already offended about how I was being treated, the interviewer started grilling me about my love for Star Trek and said that theatrics wouldn't fly in the position I was being interviewed for. Looking back, I should have never accepted the job, but the allure of working on swarms was too great. The first office I worked at was an office building that didn't stand out in any way at all. I believe our neighbors in the office park were a fashion studio and a dentist, among others. The difference was our building had 24/7 armed security. The first few days were heavy paperwork and onboarding. One of my old bosses called me on an office phone to talk to me before I was officially onboarded. As a management nerd, the biggest challenge of working for this agency is that it's a paperless office. It has its own highly sophisticated intranet with hundreds of archival documents. The implication was that unless it's absolutely had to be saved, to never, ever write anything down. I remember an early colleague telling me, "A NAT chart is a great way to get fired." This was a challenge at first. Remembering all of the information with no documentation is not something I'm particularly built for, especially when the information is about NHI. Later, I worked in a facility within a facility just like the one I had tried to inspect. It stored a craft. Being near the craft for extended periods of time is extremely dangerous, especially if it is being experimented on with power. I didn't observe any injuries to anyone while I was there, but all sorts of long-term nasty injuries were relayed to me through rumors and warnings. The craft was shaped like a dreidel without the handle. There was a large exterior piece that went missing when it was recovered. The theory is it acted as a stabilizer, although some argue it was a crude weapon. It sat in a custom hydraulic rig that could be used to rotate it in all sorts of different positions, kind of like those Atrium astronaut training balls, where they spin you around. I wasn't on the team that got to use the rotation rig. The rig was so large and extensive, I spent a few weeks thinking it was part of the craft before someone told me otherwise. Typically, the craft would held on its side in the rig for easier storage. Its weight just naturally sat it in that way, although it was intended to be flown vertically. The shape was directly informed by its purpose. Every shape is custom molded in a metallic material that would revolutionize the way we travel if we had it. In following the topic as much as I can manage to, I've seen some other people mention the material. There were some material scientists that had been working there for decades. I never got to go inside the craft. It was guarded 24/7. Boy, did I want to look though. The agency goes out of its way to hire individuals who have little interest in working in this space at all. They recruit particularly out of the BYU. Although you have to have a contractor or a government career for around a decade to be considered for an interview, published papers don't hurt. When I worked at the second facility, the sorts of people that were there were frustrating to interact with because my initial reaction to working in that facility was extreme excitement, and it wasn't shared. I believe this is partially responsible for the stagnation. high turnover rate, and compartmentalization. I quickly learned who to trust. Part of why I'm being secretive about my ID is because the turnover rate results in a sort of summer camp work environment. It's easy to point out to classes of people in various non-leadership positions that all were hired, fired, or quit at a similar time. If I said when I started, ended, and where I worked, I'd be easily identifiable because there are so few people that match my description. Leadership has been there forever. No, not literally. The agency is divided up into several wings, not unlike the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. I'm not insinuating they're a shadow government, but the wings check and balance each other in a way a government is at least designed to. These wings include mechanical engineering, biological research, weapons research, computer science, tracking, what I'll call anthropology, what I'll call crash recovery, because that's what colleagues who are planning to come forward will call it, and security. I'll list the information about each. There are definitely more wings that I don't know about. What's unique is these subgroups exist all as part of a different parent government organization and are HQ'd where their parent agencies are. For example, the tracking wing is sort of kind of embedded as R&D at NORAD. This is a simplification of the actual paperwork involved. It's honestly complicated, and I don't know much about how it works. I do know that this is how they maintain funding, even when the parent agency goes completely dark for stretches of time. It's worth mentioning that these departments employ, at most, 50 people each. It's typically much lower than that. This is why we're all pushing for whistleblower protection. It's not hard to identify us, because there are so few of us in the first place. Mechanical engineering is exactly what it sounds like. It's the most extensive, the oldest, and the most compartmentalized. We have crashed craft in various states of complete. We had a recovered craft that worked almost perfectly that was shot down by ourselves. I saw this coming, and it's part of why I quit. There's a lot of information about this wing in the public sphere. Part of their job is to determine what each shape of craft is used for. This is an important job because we're unsure of NHI's intentions. If we discover the designs are intended to hurt us, action will have to be taken. I don't know what about means in practice, but it's what the engineers mostly study. Consider this lecture around the 10-minute mark about the differing characteristics of an F-22 versus a passenger plane. Now imagine figuring out the purpose of the passenger plane versus the F-22. Since we're humans, and those are human designs, eventually a team could figure it out. It's not as easy when the designs aren't for us, or purposes we fully understand. Triangles are the most impressive design, and we don't have one. It's likely China does. Leadership is mad about that. This team discovered a long time ago that the reason why craft appears so bright to humans is because it's not really light, but rather the product of the crazy amounts of power these craft require. Sort of like smoke coming out of an exhaust pipe. Biology is something I personally suck at, even at the high school level. I can say the NHI look like the alien from Close Encounters. As far as I know, we never had one alive. My source who told me this was unsure if it was true or not. I didn't learn much about this wing. It's the most secretive. I do know its HQ is hidden in almost plain sight. I still feel like the guy who told me where it is had to be lying, because it was just too obvious. There are bodies stored in other locations apart from their main HQ. Weapons research is a large wing, and is fairly new. It was absorbed by the Space Force when the SF was created. Frustration with the SF as a whole is part of why I left shortly before it started. I don't know much about it. It has a high turnover rate and is dangerous to work in. People were injured and compensated by a large private aerospace contractor instead of the USG. Its main job is to strap a nuke to a reverse-engineered craft and just see what the hell happens. Computer science is, or was, it may have moved after I left, HQ'd at a facility in my home state. This is rare, because most of the other wings are within a stone's throw of DC or Nevada. This is mostly based around researching the craft's navigation system. The navigation in every craft is the same. The craft uses a system that originally befuddled generations of researchers, but it's essentially a 3D Dijkstra algorithm. It finds points around the craft and chooses the most efficient possible route through space-time to get to that point. Some of the parameters it uses to gauge efficiency are totally unknown to us and are a serious point of contention. It's not autonomy, but rather obstacle avoidance, not unlike what you would see in a self-driving car. But the self-driving car could go through air, space, and water without worrying about what medium it is. Additionally, the algo accounts for this craft, place, and time. I don't think this means that the craft time travel in the way that we think they can, but rather go so fast that they experience time dilation and can hit objects in the future and potentially pass at their target destination. It's possible they do this on purpose sometimes. I don't know how much about the internal programming of the computer or how it actually does any of this. There are a few senior scientists that hold the information dear. One of them jokingly refers to it as AC, as in C for NHI. I know that he doesn't work with a computer, only a pad of paper and pen. Although the algo is extremely effective, nuclear explosions and experiments somehow interfere with this navigation. Craft particularly avoid Diablo Canyon. Even if we put something they really want there, they mostly avoid previous crash sites as well. More on crashes later. Speaking of avoidance, tracking, like I mentioned, is, or was, part of NORAD. The NHI deploy craft of various shapes and sizes all the time. I don't want to claim that they have advanced cloaking techniques, but from what I've heard, the tracking department basically is an internal game of cat and mouse. They don't have adequate technology to track the transmedium craft. All I would say on a record of NHI, no, we can track them, and know how to avoid us. They usually avoid detection by going underwater, especially in the case of particularly large, by human measurement, enormous craft. It's interesting that historical UFO designs mimic the design of buildings and vehicles of what time period. Whether this was just humans not being able to reference what the designs look like, or a form of mimicry is anonymous, I guess. Someone in leadership knows the answer. I don't. It's important to note not everyone at NORAD was part of the tracking team, but the tracking team is embedded in NORAD and interfaces with them on a minute-to-minute basis. This leads to scenarios where NORAD will report an object and the tracking team will silently acknowledge, but give no explanation. This led to a catastrophic incident that happened after I left, but knew about from a colleague. Supposedly, tracking is being moved to the Space Force to clear up these miscommunications. If I were working there, I would probably be working on that onboarding process. NORAD was moved to Cheyenne, not only to protect from a foreign adversary, but also because the facility is uniquely equipped to track NHI craft. The wing I called Anthropology is the weirdest one by far. It focuses on a few different things. They originally studied NHI's intentions and culture, if it's possible to call it that. The reports I read from this early research changed the way I see the world. Anthropology and computer science were at one point decompartmentalized to study how the NHI interact with the craft. The NHI are linked to their craft in a way that borders on biological. The actual way they interface with the components of the craft is not as sophisticated. Take this video. Although it's an immature video, the way he interfaces with a prison that moves the gas pedal is similar, albeit much simpler than the way NHI interact with their craft. They send signals using their body to systems that control the craft. It's hypothesized that they can and prefer to control craft remotely, but I'm not sure if we were really researching this. Take note that if the driver of the jerry-rigged death trap in this video panics, the car would accelerate due to heightened brain activity. When people wonder how a super-intelligent being can crash, this is part of the answer, in conjunction with the navigation system malfunctioning. I personally don't think the NHI feels stress as we do, but if they heightened their activity and overrode the pathfinding system, instead of letting it do its job, there could be an incident. A smaller subset of this wing focuses on how humans can interface with craft that are currently in the sky. If you see an image of a large disc above a gas station in the snow, it was someone in the department summoning a craft not unlike how cheap RC car controllers can interfere with each other when used at the same time. Some people are better suited to interfere with NHI craft than others. We're not sure why. On somewhat of a comedic note, one colleague was harshly punished for using this research to encounter NHI craft at a party. There was an outdoor bonfire, alcohol, and questions about what she did for work. She wasn't killed or anything, just called a dumbass and told to never ever do that again. Some people in this department are BYU graduates who believe they are directly interfacing with what were recorded in the Bible as angels. There is an even smaller subset of this wing that focuses on NHI communicating with humans. All I know about them is that they did that work at some juncture, but probably have other jobs now. Crash recovery probably has the most people involved. It's split up among several parent orgs, but funding is funneled away from it and into other departments when there's little activity. This is common among the entire agency, as funding and staff get balanced between the different wings based on progress or lack thereof. Most of the crash recovery staff are staff from tracking and security that are involved in crash recovery. It's also made up of members of all of our favorite three-letter organizations. Crash recovery's overall structure was referred to as a volunteer fire department. It's typically some people playing pool and watching movies, but when the need arises, all hands on deck from the current staff and on-call members. Crashes are exceedingly rare. The number of crashes goes down exponentially because they learn to avoid the cause of the crash. When they crash, they make no effort to retrieve the debris, save for one instance. I personally believe some crashes weren't crashes, but were NHI parking a vehicle for us, because there were no bodies recovered and the craft was in perfect shape. Security, to put it mildly, are terrifying. Imagine the very best of the SEALs, NSA, and Secret Service all working together. They are short-staffed, but that staff is not only elite, but dedicated. Their numero uno rule is people that mention the agency name are killed. It's not a question, and it happened during my time. You'll hear more about them as news as the Retaliation Dave comes out. I wasn't directly interviewed by him, but I know several people who were. The security team figured it out quickly, and you could say they aren't his fans. They constantly monitor all discussions about the topic, but rarely act in real life unless absolutely necessary. They staff facilities like the second one I worked at. This team also actively engages in disinformation, gaslighting, and other similar campaigns. Their goal is to keep the US's secrets about this tech secret, because other countries are close to breakthroughs. They also conduct counter-intel on what other countries know and counter-intel about what they know about what we know. Not to sound crazy, but the security team will see this at some point or another. So, a friendly hello to them. You can't touch this. I sure hope. I have a hunch that the current public-facing task forces are actually their own wing within security. A friend of mine texted me once, Sean Kirkpatrick, "You can get your ass kicked." Don't confuse these public-facing task forces with the work Dave and Co. are doing. Dave is the real deal. I should mention that leadership is kind of its own wing. It's not on paper, but they operate above all of the other departments. Leadership is made up of managers who pay close attention to each wing. They discuss info they know and bring up contradictions to upper managers. I don't know how far this chain goes up. I reported to someone who reported to someone. I believe it goes up higher than that. I have no idea who is in at this top or what their credentials are. I suspect they're in the private sector, with their bankroll disguised as R&D for government contracts. Leadership, honestly, made the right choices with the information they had, at least when I was there. Some bad people started to get in charge and change the way things worked among the middle managers and individual teams. They pissed people off and led them to multiple catastrophes. As far as I know, they faced no discipline. So, that was exhaustive. Those are the wings of the agency that I knew about during my time there. It feels good to get this off my chest. I've been sort of keeping up to date on the topic's coverage in mainstream media and want to give some of my thoughts on this. If the US comes out directly and says we have craft, we have bodies, it means we are all on the verge of a serious global conflict like we've never seen before. They will only reveal this to the public if absolutely necessary. The way the information is going to come out is through people like Dave and further probing from Congress. Not all of it should be public information, but I believe the technology that is just sitting somewhere would completely revolutionize the way we live. I don't think anything significant will happen in my lifetime. It was a frustrating job because everything was so stagnant and had so much potential. We're talking about technology so advanced it could render every single current global issue obsolete. If we solve two major issues with the craft and were able to manufacture them, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. The technology being incorporated into our technical revolution is a hoax. I heard one theory from a guy at a bar that the transitors at Bell Labs were inspired by technology at Area 51. This is a joke. The technology makes transitors look like sticks and stones. I believe multiple species of NHI is misinformation spun up by the security team. There are mystery wings of the agency I didn't get to learn about during my time. It's possible one of these researches other species, but I doubt that. NHI potentially experiment on us, and definitely experiment on animals. We have no idea why. The main reason you'll never see organized disclosure is because nobody can agree on what to say. We simply don't know enough. Namely, the NHI's intentions. Sort of, we have a good theory, and where they are from. The anthropology wing believes the NHI are controlled by an intelligence that is beyond our current understanding of how life works. The biology reports conflict with this, which is why things can't be compartmentalized. If the government were to disclose info, they'd have to get the story straight. We also have no idea where they are from. We, as in everyone I worked with. It's possible someone in high up in leadership knows. I don't think the answer is as simple as another planet or caves on Earth. The reason why specific facility locations are kept from the public is because some of them are sensitive and also not entirely NHI research based. It would be possible for some TikTokers and hippies to storm the first office I worked at if they were careful. Every place where the agency works is also home to other operations, which is why it's so hard to identify where they are. Lower leadership is HQ'd in DC, and the upper management is split between Nevada, Australia, and another foreign country. Security is everywhere and potentially even work remotely within an HQ. I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker when some of my friends were, but I turned it down due to my specific involvement and how easy it would be to track me down if I gave particular juicy info. I believe the story will come out soon. I no longer work in the field and teach full-time. After a quick proofread, that's my post. I'm not tuned into discussions other than what major outlets have to say, but I hope some of my information is interesting. It felt good to type, even if my post doesn't get accepted. I feel tempted to sign off with my first name how I always do in emails, but I have a feeling that would end badly. I'm currently on a camping trip with my family, but I'll be around to answer questions at various times. This happened in college. At the time, I was 18 and a sophomore. I had just recently gotten out of a 6-year relationship and was starting to get into the dating scene. I downloaded Tinder and got to swiping. Some background, I didn't want to talk to someone that went to my university because thinking about running into someone I was talking to out of the wild really made me anxious. I ended up matching with this guy. We'll call him Marco. Marco was 20 and a junior at the neighboring university, about 15 minutes up the road. He had one selfie and the other 2 pictures he had were group photos, and they seemed older but didn't think much of it. We started chatting and very quickly he asked for my phone number. I would say it's a little too early for that, but he kept insisting and I eventually gave in. After about 2 days of talking, he started to ask for pictures, so I would send selfies. He would ask for more provocative pictures, and I kept shutting it down, telling him I wasn't interested in that and I just wanted to see where things went. Marco would say how he couldn't wait to see me, so he could kiss me, and every time he would say that I changed the subject. We planned a date after a week of talking. He said that he knew a good Indian restaurant over by his school, and then we could walk into the downtown area after. I agreed, as it would be in a public place. The day came for the date, and again I started to get a weird feeling. I told my roommate what we had planned, and she said she would keep her phone on her if I needed her. A few hours before the date, I got cold feet and told him my car wouldn't start and asked to reschedule. He offered to pick me up and I kept telling him no and that we should reschedule, but he kept insisting and started to make me feel guilty. He would say how he was looking forward to it for the past few days and I was hurting his feelings and that he would be more than willing to get me, but I'm not giving him that chance. Well, I caved and it was the worst decision ever. Despite the feelings I was having, I told him the information to come and get me outside of my dorm. Right when I got into the car, I realized that this was probably going to be a horrible date. Right away, he tried to hold my hand and asked to give me a kiss. I denied and he started to drive off. On the way to our destination, he drops that we are no longer going to the restaurant and that we are going to his apartment instead, and he was going to cook me dinner. At that point, my heart sank and I started to have a small panic attack. I texted my roommates letting her know. She was worried and said that she would come and get me if I needed. Again, not listening to my gut, I tell her that it's fine and we get to his place. When I say this apartment was disgusting, I mean it was covered in trash, dirty clothes, and dishes. He said that we had to go into his small room because his roommate was home and he didn't like it when he had company. His bedroom was even worse than the common area. There was only a single path to the bed and to the bathroom. It was so dirty. We sat in his bed and he turned on a movie. I can't remember the movie. All I remember is the stench of the room and him starting to make advances on me. Marco started rubbing my back and shoulders. I kept scooting away, trying to put some distance between us, but it didn't work. After a few minutes, he started to force himself onto me. He started to kiss me hard and holding my hand so that I couldn't move. I don't know how, but he eventually was on top of me, forcing his entire body weight on me, and I just couldn't move an inch. I was paralyzed by fear. He doesn't get much further than that, because as soon as he's on me, he's just as quickly off and running to his restroom, and he's throwing up. I have never been so thankful for vomit. I don't know why he got sick. When he came out, he apologized to getting sick, that it happens all the time, and says he needs to take me home. Trembling, I just get up, straighten myself, and follow him out. I still don't know if he's going to try anything else, and I didn't want to aggravate him or say anything wrong. So I try to act like nothing was wrong to get home safely, and that happens. He pulls up to my building, tells me that he wants to make it up to me, and I just nod and say goodnight and get out of the car. Once inside, I blocked him, reported him on Tinder, and deleted the app. I also took extra measures to block him on any social media I could. I didn't tell anyone at first what happened. I was embarrassed because I put myself in that position. I started getting calls from random numbers, and when I answered, there wouldn't be anyone else on the other line. I would block the number and a new one would be calling. It got to the point where my phone was ringing constantly. After the phone calls were random Facebook and Instagram messages from different accounts. They would say things like, "Why are you ignoring me? Why aren't you talking to me?" And then they started getting more aggressive and threatening. My roommate started getting messages and I had to tell her everything. She told me I needed to report him, or at least tell my parents. I didn't do either because I was scared. That is, until I started receiving random pictures of myself. I would be walking on campus, in the dining hall, in class. Then I got one of me in my dorm room. It was taken through my window, which was on the second floor. However, the main street was a hill that was the same level as my window, and that is what my room faced, and my bed was in front of that window. I told my roommate and she made me tell our RA. The RA was very concerned and ended up calling the campus police. I made a report with them. The messages continued and so did the photos until one day, about a week later, he approached me on campus. He grabbed me by the arm and tried to take me to his car. I started to yell and luckily there was campus police nearby. He was arrested and was banned from my campus and I didn't hear from him again. This was in 2014, so some of my memories aren't as vivid as I have tried to block this part out of my past. Not many people know that this happened to me. To this day, my family doesn't know. The only people that know are my college roommate, the RA, the campus police, my therapist, and as of the other night, my fiance. I want to spread awareness of the dangers of online dating. Always trust your gut, If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. Not all online dating has consequences. I met my now fiance a few years later on Facebook dating, but your gut is usually right, and sometimes it's crucial to listen to it. With that being said, Marco, let's never meet again. So it started about October or somewhere in November. I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park a street away from my house, so I have a short walk to my house. My house is on a main road with one drive, and my parents park on that driveway. I asked my mother if this was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She refused it was her, and my father also said it wasn't him. So I thought it was a kind soul, or perhaps a thoughtful person. After all, where I park has a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continues for the months onwards. It has only recently stopped since parking away from that side street. I asked an older couple of people on that street, and they said it wasn't them either. At this point, I only wanted to say thank you. So I continued going to work and didn't notice anything else until the winter weather got worse. December of 2023 was when the weirdness continued. The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasions. Since I set off from work at 7 a.m., it can be frosty at that time, and I would need to de-ice my car. About mid-December, I remember running late for work. It was 7:15 in the morning, and I still had not de-iced my car. So I was doing a careful rush to my car as it was very cold and icy, only to get there and see it had been de-iced for me. I was confused, and a little happy but also shaken. It was a strange feeling. Again, I asked my parents and anyone I saw on the side street. It wasn't any of them. My mom laughed and said you might have a secret admirer. Well, it's like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few more times on those very icy days. From January onwards is when it got strange to the point I started parking elsewhere. About the end of January, start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as the homemade food left on top of my car. Don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing these away once I got to work, but I found the situation was getting beyond strange. Around the same time, the first letter or note was left. It was written in what I could describe as doctor handwriting. It was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, the princess I deserve to be treated like. I brought this home and showed my parents, and they didn't like this at all. My dad said he was going to start parking on the street, and I can park on the driveway for a while. I said that would be a good idea, however, if this person was looking for my car, then he would know which house was mine. My dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and may actually already know where I live. He stated the main thing was me walking home from my car to my house at 8:15 p.m. I worked 12 shifts. He stated he would sort the situation out if anything happened. I questioned possibly going to the police, and he stated that they would laugh at us without any proof. He was right, we didn't have anything. I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. It's now April. I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street, still close to my house. Now nothing has happened since February, and I hope it doesn't as it was starting to get worse. Do I have a stalker? Or someone just trying to fuck with me? Right off the bat, I'd like to say that this incident is one of few that have truly stuck with me. Although this took place in January of the previous year, it definitely keeps me awake at night. It seems surreal to me that so many weird things happen to people on a daily basis, and I'd never imagined them happening to me either. Anyway, I was staying abroad due to college, and there wasn't a single thing that had irked me or creeped me out. I lived in a relatively populated area. There were a lot of young women in my apartment, and even older women, so you could say I felt safe in my own home. Walking the streets was also safe, since there were always people around. There were apartments, parks, houses, those full-time 7-Elevens and small cafes. I'm pretty sure there was a small motel as well. Regardless, it creates a pretty decent image of the area. Although the university taught me the lessons in English for all the foreign students, I still wanted to learn the language to respect and experience the culture. It was fun, and I made quite a few friends in those classes. Well, one day I was walking to a convenience store from the class. I remember being quite dazed and tired. It was around 8 p.m. The class ended a while back, but since I had the once-in-a-lifetime leisure time, I decided to explore the place. I knew my way around, and I was feeling pretty confident about the routes and all. As time passed, I walked and reached this giant road with some empty plots to the right. Don't get me wrong, it was a residential area, and I could even hear noises from a couple of houses. Now, this is where it's a little weird. There's a bunch of houses, but as you keep walking towards the city and all the hustle bustle, there is this entire secluded area of just road and streetlights. The convenience store was like 4 kilometers away, approximately. I was feeling uncomfortable and very nervous as well, because of a previous incident I had. So I decided to stop and look around. There was nothing, but I decided to start jogging further, while looking side to side and back a little too. Not even 30 seconds passed, and I bumped into someone. I felt a feeling of dread rush over me, and my hair just stood up. My palms started shaking, and I didn't even lift my head up to see who it was. I apologized like crazy, simultaneously backing away and getting ready to fucking bolt out of there, like I was in the damn Olympics or something. The person came in front of me, started walking towards me in little steps, and started moving in this weird swaying motion. It was almost like a cartoon, and while swaying, the person just said, "What the fuck? What are you? Are you okay?" With this arrogant tone. I say person because I genuinely couldn't tell if this person was a man or a woman. Their face was covered by a mask, and they wore a large hoodie with sweatpants. The voice was sort of muffled but didn't sound masculine or feminine. The person started swearing and doing the weird swaying motion while reaching in their pants socket. I saw a glimpse of something shiny, and my instincts, that so conveniently died out, kicked in. I took the chance and fled the damn place. I went to the store and told the clerk. They called the police, who found 2 fucking shoes on the same spot. Along with the shoes was the mask, apparently. I never found out who it was, what they wanted, or how. I never saw them looking around in the empty plots. There were no bushes, and the light wasn't that scarce either. But I'm glad I'm safe. Although this happened a year ago, I still feel like I'm not completely safe. I don't know if it's paranoia or something, but I've been having a bad feeling since the beginning of this month. Even if I'm with other people or at home with my boyfriend, I feel like I have no privacy. Does anyone know what to do? So this happened about 5 years ago, and it still creeps me out. I was 18 at the time, and now I'm 23. I was walking home from work at this local pizza joint and took my usual route home. It was about 9:45 to 10:15 at night, and it was super dark. As I'm getting about 100 yards away from the street I live on, a white van turns onto that street. Nothing suspicious, but something didn't sit right with me. So I yanked out my earbuds and paused my music. I then turned down my street, and as I'm getting closer to my house, I started getting a weird gut feeling. I look up from my phone, and I was about to text my roommate, who was out of town at the time, that I was almost home. About 15 yards or so, as I look up, I notice the white van sitting in front of my house, and the man inside is just staring at me, the yellow car light shining in his face. He had brown hair, glasses, and facial hair. His van lights were off, but his car was running. I stop and put my back into a tree in my neighbor's yard, and I just stood there, maintaining eye contact with this man. After about what seemed like an eternity, probably like 5 minutes minimum, he starts driving towards the stop sign at the end of the road. I didn't put my back to him. I kept my back to the tree and maintained visual on the van the entire time until it stopped at the stop sign. He just sat there for probably 2 or 3 minutes, all while I'm not looking away and my back's still on that tree. Finally, he turned right, the direction in which I had come from, and after about 20 seconds of making sure he or anybody else wasn't coming, I bolt to my house. I quickly get inside and lock the door. I go to the window and very quietly look through the blinds. I didn't turn on any lights because I'm not stupid. After a few seconds of looking, he drove back up and down the street and left again. Afterwards, I texted my roommate what happened and then went to each and every one of the windows in my house to make sure they were locked, along with the back door and the garage door. I made sure to keep all lights off for the remainder of the night. I didn't sleep a tick that night. I was so paranoid at every sound or movement. Let's just say I never walked home after that. To the man in the van, let's never meet again. This is a story that pops back up in my head from time to time. I've only just told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place in here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided that it was time for her to start taking her driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she'd pass the upcoming test first try. My little brother and I were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom here to drive around for a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. When we arrived to the parking lot, later on in the morning, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I quickly got bored though, and asked if we could go over to this little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around in the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 or 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulls up into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the exit or entrance. The car turns around and stops on my right side, with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down his window and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was good looking and young. A guess would be around 30. This is where things started to get weird. On the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in the baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police, and that we have to get in the car immediately as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm in front of his chest as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us once again to get in the car or else he'd have to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly, the woman put down the newspaper, showed her face and told us in the most calm, motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at this point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive us, since the road down the parking lot was twisted all the way. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could. As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I weren't alone, he threw his car into the gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shit himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat the guy up himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who these people were, but this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you or the ones you love. I'm not sure what these people would have done to us. I am sure though that one thing, they definitely weren't from the police.